Hi everybody, today we're going to talk about chapter 2, which is the theories of development. The first one that we go through is always fact or fiction. Freud believed that only adults experience psychosexual stages in their development based on inner drives and unconscious needs. This is not true. Number 2, proponents of behaviorism believe that all behavior arises directly from operant or classical conditioning. This is also not true. Number 3, Piaget believed that how people think and how they understand the world depends on their age. This is true, according to Piaget. And number 4, the information processing approach uses analogies that compare human thinking processes to the way a computer functions. And this is also true. So what do theories do? A developmental theory is based on a group of ideas, assumptions, and generalizations that interpret and illuminate the thousands of observations that have been made about human growth. So some theories produce hypotheses, some generate discoveries, and some offer practical guidance. Remember not to confuse theories with facts. Theories organize observations in a coherent story. More importantly, remember not to confuse the word theory with the colloquial use of the word meaning guess. Developmental theories is basically a framework for explaining patterns and problems of development. So there are 3 grand theories that are comprehensive, enduring, and widely applied. They're the psychoanalytic, behavioral, and cognitive. The psychoanalytic and behavioral theories emerged in the first half of the 20th century, while cognitive theory emerged mid-century as the seedbed of research hypotheses in the psychology. So you'll see there's some specific names you've probably heard about already. Psychoanalytic is Freud and Erikson, and it has to do with irrational unconscious drives and motives. And they both believe that they originate in childhood. Behavioral is Watson, Pavlov, Skinner. Many of you have heard about the dog salivating when you heard a bell. That's the behavioral theory. And cognitive is Jean Piaget, and it focuses on how people change over time. Sigmund Freud, he was alive from 1856 to 1939, and he was the world's first psychoanalyst and a prolific writer. His theory involves psychosexual stages, and with each stage related to a specific sensual satisfaction and linked to a major developmental needs and challenges. So as you can see, younger children is latency, which not younger children, I'm sorry, 6 to 11 years. Oral stage for younger children, and this is when we're seeing babies always putting things in their mouths, whether it be a pacifier, toys, their fingers, but that's that oral stage. The next stage is 1 to 3 years old. That's the anal stage, and that's when children are toilet training. The phallic stage is from 3 to 6 years old, and this is when those of you that have been around children will see it. Boys are extremely proud of their penises. They will drop their pants and show anyone their penises if they want to, and Freud believed that girls wonder at this stage why they don't have penises. 6 to 11 is latency, and this is basically when the sexuality is kind of latent at that point. It's not at the forefront. And then Freud believed that new stages did not occur in the adult years. Rather, earlier stages influenced adult behavior. So adolescence through adulthood is the genital stage, and that has to do with pleasure and love. The grand theory of behaviorism is also called learning behavior theory because it describes the laws and processes by which behavior is learned. So what are the 3 behavioral learning processes? One is classical conditioning, and this is when the learning process, which is natural, unconditioned, responds. For example, fear when seeing a lion out of a cage becomes triggered by a formally neutral stimulus by repeatedly pairing it with the stimulus. This is the whole Pavlov dog bell theory. So what would happen is every time the bell would ring, the dog would get food and start to salivate because he knew the food was coming. So by the end, because they kept ringing the bell and giving the dog food, they would ring the bell and the dog would start to salivate expecting food, but food didn't necessarily come. He just now associated the bell with food and would salivate because of the bell. Social learning theory is an extension of behaviorism that emphasizes the influence that other people have over a person's behavior. Even without specific reinforcement, every individual learns many things through observation and imitation of other people. And operant conditioning, this is the learning process by which a particular action is followed by something desired, which makes a person or animal more likely to repeat the action. So this is when we're using the reinforcements. Like kids love positive reinforcement, getting stickers for doing something right, getting praise. When someone uses the term conditioning, they mean a process by which responses become linked to a particular stimuli and learning takes place. An example of classical conditioning is learning to fear a neutral flash of light when that is repeatedly followed by a startling boom of thunder. And then what we look at as behaviorism is the study of observable behavior. So this is an example of classical conditioning. Do visits to healthcare providers ever make you feel anxious and cause your blood pressure to momentarily rise? So this is before the white coat appears. Her blood pressure is 120/80. After the doctor appears, her blood pressure goes up to 140/90, which is too high. This syndrome is attributed to nurses in white tops too. Today, why do you think nurses often wear color other than white or even a lively print? Curiously, classical conditioning was discovered by the psychologist Ivan Pavlov, 1849 to 1936, as he was researching the digestive processes of dogs, in particular salivation in dogs. He noted that not only did the dogs drool when they smelled food, but they began to drool when they heard the footsteps of lab attendants who brought the food. This discovery prompted the famous experiment, which I already discussed, with the classical conditioning. So it's a learning process that can be meaningful because of the stimulus. So the white coat syndrome is an everyday example of classically conditioning behavior. Just the sight of the white coat raises people's blood pressure. Children associate going to the doctor with getting shots and pain. So same thing, that happens at a very young age. Operant conditioning. How is operant conditioning used to teach steel tricks? Here the behavior is balancing a ball and the consequence is receiving food. Translate this process to human development and you might better answer questions like, what happens when a child gets a hug for wanted behavior? When a gambler hits a jackpot by pulling the lever of a slot machine? B.F. Skinner, from 1904 to 1990, experimented with rats and pigeons, but he also created a controlled environment for his infant daughter. It was a glass-enclosed crib in which temperature, humidity, and perceptual stimulation could be controlled to make the baby's time in the crib enjoyable and educational. His observations of her became part of his study about behavior. So this is where we see the reinforcement that we know this works in terms of helping influence people's behaviors. Even in college classes, reinforcements would be considered grades. Social learning theory is an extension of behavior. Definition. Some social learning occurs through modeling when people copy what they see others do, often called observational learning. The belief that a person's achievements depend on a person's actions, called self-efficacy, is an important aspect of social learning theory. Albert Bandura developed this theory and conducted a famous observational learning experiment. In the experiment, children observed an adult that began to pound, kick, and throw a large inflated Bobo doll around a room while yelling such remarks as, "Sock him in the nose, kick him." When the children were later left alone in a room with the Bobo doll, their inhibitions lowered and they imitated the very acts they'd observed, and the children even used the very words they'd heard the adults exclaim. It's one of the reasons why we say we have to be careful about swearing in front of kids, because they do imitate and model our behavior. The next grand theory is the cognitive theory. According to the cognitive theory, one of several grand theories, our thoughts shape our attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors. Jean Piaget, who lived from 1896 to 1980, studied how children's thinking changes with time and experiences, and how their thought processes affect their behavior. During Piaget's observations of children, their wrong answers caught his attention, since how children think turned out to be much more revealing than what they knew. So when a baby begins to move out of the sensory motor period, she understands that you still exist even when you hide your face in a game of peekaboo. When a 4-year-old who thinks pre-operationally says that the sun wakes him up, he may well be thinking magically, that is, believing that the sun is truly coming to greet him. When a 7-year-old moves out of the pre-operational period, she knows a liquid in a tall, thin container and a wide, short container are equal if the same amount has been poured into each vessel. And when a teenager wonders why humans exist or how people can create an ethical society, that teen has entered the formal period by thinking theoretically and abstractly. Piaget believed there were 4 stages of development: sensory motor, pre-operational, concrete operational, and formal operational. This is going through them very quickly, and as we go through the chapters of development, we'll focus on them more. But know that Piaget believed that there are 4 theories and that children go through them, and they go through them in progression, they go in order, and it does have an effect. The age of the child does impact which stage they are in. The information processing theory. How many animals do you recall from the top half of the card? Let's see. So how many animals can you recall? You probably can recall quite a few. The computer analysis used in information processing compares human thinking processes to sensory input, connections, and stored memories and output. When this test was given to children, older rather than younger children were better at recalling the animals, showing how they successfully employed a selective attention. But when asked about recall of the household items, the performance of difference between older and younger children evaporated. Young children information process researchers concluded can't focus their attention as well on what is relevant and filter out extraneous stimuli. So as we get older, we are better at being able to filter out what's important and what isn't important to understand. And selective attention is the ability to concentrate on some stimuli while ignoring others. This is one of my favorite theories, the sociocultural theory. Lev Vygotsky, who lived from 1896 to 1934, was a Russian psychologist, and he pioneered the sociocultural perspective. In his view, each person, schooled or not, develops competencies taught by more skilled members of the society who are tutors or mentors in what he calls an apprenticeship of thinking. So how adults interact with children teaches them social norms. What do you say? And she's saying please, and he's saying okay. So he just taught her a social norm of how to ask for something. And then she says thank you. So what Vygotsky is saying is that there's a dynamic interaction going on, and that children are learning basically almost unconsciously from their interactions with adults and other people in their environment around them. Then there's the evolutionary theory, and according to evolutionary theory, 2 long-standing biologically based drives for every species are survival and reproduction. Understanding these 2 provides insight into important lifespan topics like lust, romance, protective parenthood, onset of disease, and fear of death, as you see illustrated on this slide. So scared by a snake, scared of death by car. What are you more scared of? Which fear would have helped our ancestors survive? So that's a very interesting question, because most of us would be more scared of the car now. But pre-cars, the snake would be the one that would keep you alive, being scared of it. When you see the snake in a car, does your heart race more while viewing the typical slithering of a snake than while viewing the typical movement of a car? Probably so, and that would support the idea of selective adaptation to encourage human survival against the potentially deadly bite of a snake. An adaptation that would have taken many generations of human history to become more frequent. As for cars, they were invented about 100 years ago, a drop in the bucket of time for human history. I think about, even as a parent, my kids nowadays, I don't think would be so scared of a snake, but when I see a car moving back in a parking lot, I'm like running after them, screaming to get out of the way. So 1 death in a billion by snake. In 2009, 1 U.S. death in 5,000. What's this debate about? Nature, a general term for traits, capacities, and limitations that each individual inherits genetically from his or her parents at conception. And nurture, a general term for all environmental influences that affect development after an individual is conceived. How do we integrate all these approaches into our thinking about development? Today, most developmental experts take an eclectic approach in which they apply aspects of various theories of development rather than adhering exclusively to one. In the 1950s, the psychologist Henry Harlow studied learning in monkeys. By surprise, he made a discovery about infant attachment to a mother, and that discovery questioned elements of both psychoanalytic and behaviorist theories, as well as influence from nature and nurture. So we think that now it used to be that we thought there was so much more involved in the nurture component to who we are, and now we're realizing that our genetics and what we're born with does make a predisposition to many things of how we are perceive things in our environment. So basically, closing thoughts about this. Think of these 5 perspectives as a hand that functions with the 5 fingers. Although each finger is different, some are more useful than others. Also consider that the ability of this one hand with 5 fingers may not be able to completely explain every aspect of development. Some believe that babies will choose whatever provides a reward. This is a nurture perspective. Experience is what determines behavior and even the essence and origins of attachment. Does the outcome of Harlow's studies support that perspective, or is this something about the monkey's nature that overrides any rewards, such as food? This is the end of the PowerPoint for Lecture 2. I want you to go to the discussion and respond to creating your own theory of development. And remember, you can take pieces from each theory and explain why you think they're relevant.